I just pre-wet the paper a moment ago, and I'm getting everything readjusted. I apologize for the movement on the screen. And we'll go right about here. How does that look, everybody? So this is an 11 by 15 sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. A quarter sheet. I buy it by the full sheet and I tear it into fourths. I just saturated the paper with the brush. I'm going to do it again. This is a medium-sized Ron Ranson Hake. And I will adjust my palette while that paper adjusts itself. I don't really have much of a plan for today's painting, but we'll see what we can come up with. As of right now, today is just a painting, just to paint. Let's see if there's any things I want to think about or experiment with while I do this one. I will say that I want a, let's go for a very bright spot in the sky. Let's reflect that bright spot in water. We'll go for a dark, maybe our darkest dark over the bright spot. Yeah, really can't think of much questions or experiments that I want to approach today. I apologize for that. I hope this isn't a boring video. This will be kind of a stream of conscious painting. Put a lot of alizarin on there right now, so maybe we'll use a lot of that in the beginning and see what happens with it. Where's my Payne's Gray gone? Let's see. Maybe coming up to a point where I have to do a little bit of cleaning and organizing. It really seems to be soaking the paper water up quickly, and the heater has been on in the house in the past few days because the temperature's been dropping to 30s, 40s. So maybe that says something about the humidity in the house. Yeah, my Payne's Gray. That'd be an interesting thing to track while painting. Do the painting, see what the temperature was at, what the humidity in the house was, etc. I know when I try to watercolor outdoors, being in Louisiana, regardless of the humidity, it dries super quick. Where I can't even get through this starting stage of putting color in. So it's just raw sienna. We'll do a tree line here towards us. We'll do that there. So our bright spot will be up in here. Let's get some the alizarin crimson. Now, sorry for my stuffiness. Put that in low on that horizon. I don't want to be all the way across with it. I want some variation. Let's mix that with the raw sienna, see what orange we can make with it. Bring a little bit of that color down, but I feel like a lot of that's going to be covered up with reflections and whatnot. This will be land right in here. That's going to have to be darker. This is a compositional shape that I've done before. I guess it's a triangular shape. Here, comes in and across. Let's wash this. A little bit of cerulean blue on the palette. I'm just going to get a soupy mix. I'm going to get this pushed flat. I think the thought for this one is that this probably won't show through in the final stage of this painting. But I think this is almost essential. This stage, maybe it's maybe here's the philosophical moment for this painting right off the bat. That was a little bit of cerulean. This is gonna be a little bit ultramarine. I think I'm gonna tone down the blue, mix a little bit of burnt umber in there. That kind of setting the emotion of the painting and the feel for what's going on. So even though it doesn't show through, I'm kind of getting that feel for what's going on in this atmosphere. Right now, there's so many warm colors that I have down. Maybe it's that hot, hazy end of a day. I'll probably dry this off and call it a Turner painting right there and say it's done. I feel like I haven't used the recipe of the rust-based red with ultramarine in a while, so I'm gonna do that. I say rust-based red because I'm using the Venetian red, but you can use the light red oxide. This gives us a purpley mixture for the receding far distant objects. This is going to be a tree line. The one issue that I may come across is the fact that the speed at which the paper is drying compared to the lack of concentration of this paint mixture. So we might get some weird textures and backwashes. What would be fun is if we bring up stuff like here. Bring those guys up into the sky. A little bit of raw sienna, just feeding it in to those edges, those little highlights. And I'll take a little indithrone blue, mix it with the burnt umber, feed it down into the bottom for the darks. I don't see too much variation in this far distance, but it'd be nice. Not too much clarity, it'll diffuse. I do like that edge right there, but that's so far to the edge that it probably won't make it into the final cut with the cropping. Mix a little bit of Payne's Gray, throw that back in here too. If you don't use Payne's Gray, that's just a mixture of blue and a black if you have that. I think I'll bring this forward. And this will be a closer shade. Let me use this moment to define the bend in the water. So this is the land that we'll have. Get the bend. This will be the side that we're standing on. Now, I do want to kind of bring it a little bit in for perspective. And it'll come right back around. We're gonna have to build up our darks right in here. Let's mix a little bit of lemon yellow into our mud. Okay, that kind of toned down that I think it was raw sienna and what alizarin that we had in there. This is the rigger brush, just mixing a dark. And when I say just mixing a dark, I usually just go burnt sienna or burnt umber and ultramarine or Payne's Gray, just kind of getting on there. This is just getting some textures of this group of foliage up. And we're gonna have the darks from that. So ultramarine mix into my mixture. Now that ultramarine, that pure blue that's getting put down, that is kind of a kind of start making a style choice if you want at that point. Like, I'm gonna kind of tone it down, but you know, that's, I think personally, where you could start separating some schools of art and movement and feel based off of that. So I'm taking just my darks to kind of tone that down, but I think you'd see more pure pigment and impressionism. And I guess don't quote me on that because I'm not perfect with the different schools of painting, but you can emulate them with the color palette. I prefer more of the tonalist school. I'd sprayed that with the water, as you had saw. I kind of like that droopy feeling. It makes me think of a lot of that overgrowth that you'll see along the edge of water. I had sprayed it because of how dry that air was getting, and for me, with painting water, I prefer to have that initial part wet. Kind of just bringing some shapes out. I think this is still wet, so this area is going to diffuse, but just make some sort of color on the rigger. I think sometimes you can get away with putting just random foliage, but if you have it too far away from the main body, you need to have you usually should have something connecting it to it. I think some scraping back here would be fun. It might hinder the haziness that we're getting, but let's see. I think sometimes the scraping might be the one thing that you kind of can't take back with watercolor, where you can erase a lot of stuff, but once you start doing the scraping or like overworking an area or something like that, I don't mean overwork in the sense of tickling and keep on working the same spot. I mean damaging the paper itself. that's when you can't. That's when it's hardest to correct things. But I'm getting interesting scrapes going on. I'm using a pointed end. Your is wet, so I'm not really pushing the pigment out of it. I'm damaging the paper and letting the pigment fill it in. That area might be more stronger. I'm reluctant to dry this off before really coming up with a plan for the foreground. I think we had said we'd have a dark come over it, so what I'm going to probably do is do some very stark trunks around these edges. Foliage wise, I'm not really sure what we'll have with it. So this is a stylistic question. Do I dry my paper, or do I get my strong pigments, put this in, let it diffuse some, and then go again? I think I answered my own question. I think will be the funner way. So we'll come up here like that. I don't want to do any offshoot branches yet, because I find that I do the I might do the same shape at the same height. So let me do the trunks first, and then we'll do that. Because you want to keep in mind how this one is going to look next to that one, whether it's following the same form, whether it's complementing it, whether it's too much of the same thing. I'm keeping in mind the distance that I'm placing between the trees. Notice how it's not, this distance is not the same as this distance, so we have a variation there. We are going to have the classic growth that I'll put up around it. As we recede, the thickness of the trees will thin out. Where that, okay, so let's put our last, let's go here. I'm going to want one right here. I like to just bring up darks around it. It helps the tree sit. Let's see, Indothrone Blue, Burnt Umber. This guy, let's have his offshoot go here. And then I'll come back in with the rigger and play around. I'm getting a lot of diffusion here because I did the wet and wet, and I decided against. See, I was tempted to do that branch again. So let's let this branch happen here. So we've done the wet and wet. We have the diffusion, but that might help with the the whole haze of the scene. Let's let this guy come straight up by himself. And have a completely separate guy down here. Okay. So this, keeping in mind everything else that's taking place, we could have an offshoot here. He'd start getting tangled up with the other one. Do I let it pass in front or behind? So let's let it come out front. Dark ground. So you see how that ultramarine kind of got covered up from earlier. I could take the rigger, or not the rigger, the card. You could scrape a variety of ways. When I think about the videos, I do think a lot about how you could probably do video after video discussing all the different ways to get whites in a watercolor painting. The scraping, the leaving it white, the masking, the magic eraser, gouache, razor blade. There's a lot of ways. Paper towel, lifting. Maybe a variety of ways to get whites plus a variety of textures is that. And a variety of whites would be a play on the values. So maybe that's why it comes to mind. No really rhyme or reason here, just going up and creating some interesting features. I am going to come back over with more pigment when I dry stuff. Now the scraping seems to be giving me some whites down in here. Earlier I was just doing the scraping for the black scraping. So we get an interesting play between the two. We will need a little something back here. Okay. So this is burnt sienna and the indothrone, no burnt on burnt indothrone. I may let a little sap green come into this one at some point. I'm finding some of these edges, leaving some of them lost. I think we'll benefit from a little rigger work right in there. I'm going to mix the rigger into, I want to mix a concentrated mixture of what I just had. Let me water it down a little bit while my paper is wet, and then this will probably be the last wet and wet. So I want this to fade back a little bit and soften like that. One thing I was thinking about, I was looking at it. I was looking at a tree. It sounds like a weird story, but I was looking at a tree, And I was looking at all the interlacings and the overlappings of the branches. You know, it's winter, even though my yard looks like it needs to be cut now. I was looking at all those interlacings, and I was thinking about how in the Chinese tradition, at least from what I remember, you wanted to avoid, I think they actually had a name for it. I might, like hashtag type shapes, like and that would create a diamond. So you want to be wary of that taking place. So I'm just going around adding these in. I think one of the things that I miss, like I used to, I lived in New York when I was younger. Went to college in New York. I think one of the things I miss is pure winter. And around this time of year, a lot of painters get to paint snowy scenes and winter scenes and whatnot, where the most I get is kind of in autumn to experience now. A lot of good painters, great painters that made books and did books on painting and whatnot, had a lot of their work based on snowscapes and whatnot. Like that Carlson's Guide to Painting, he had a lot of examples in there that were snow. And who else? Zoltan Sabo, the watercolorist, who has a lot of books out. You know, he had passed away, but he had a lot of different art books. He had a lot of snow examples, or a wet and wet. I think that would be fun, going through some of his books and his paintings and his techniques and ideas and try them out. I don't know if I'd be able to show anything from the book on the video due to copyright issues, but that might be fun, at least talking through the ideas. This is a fun one. Like I said, I did this compositional shape in the past and didn't really have much planned for this painting, so I'm very happy you know, waking up from a nap and having what looks to me as a success so far. So I'm filming this on a Thursday, I have to brag, on Monday, I finally deadlifted 501 pounds. It took me a few years to get to that point. I've attempted it, and I just was never in the cards. It was in the weight room, so I'm gonna have to eventually do another competition just to get it in a competition. But it was a very exciting moment for me, and I often think about talking about powerlifting in these videos. Not and like I said, not that I was going to brag, but I always think about talking about them, but not from the standpoint of bragging, but just perseverance. That painting is a hobby. Just like going to the gym, it could be a hobby or something like that. It could also be a sport, like strength training, competitions and whatnot. Trying to paint professionally for a living, which I don't do. This is my hobby, and fortunately once in a while somebody likes what I do. But it might be helpful to have those types of things in life, and to have a slightly competitive spirit when it comes to painting. Not so much competitive against other painters. I think that you can think of painting as a one-man sport where you're competing against yourself. Just like at the end of the day, something like track or anything where you're trying to just better yourself, better your personal score, your time that you ran something in, cycling. Think of it from the standpoint of how can you better yourself. And when it comes to like weightlifting, as a especially powerlifting, you're not going to progress linearly. The guy that I coach with, he says that to the kids, is that looking back at that, what you had done, see what you had lifted when we had this last time in the workout, usually about 3 weeks in the past, something like that. Try to plan your weights accordingly, but you're not going to hit a personal best every time. And if you did that, you'd be the strongest man in the world, strongest woman in the world within a year. Know that you take a few steps forward, you might have a step backward. That's that old myth about the man, I guess it was a Greek myth, who became super strong by every day waking up and lifting up a baby cow. So every day the baby cow gets heavier. So every day the guy lifts up something slightly stronger. It doesn't work like that. And with painting, you'll have your ups and downs. And you have to be accepting of that. Just like moods and emotions. You'll have good days and you'll have bad days. You'll have your ups and downs. And just be cognizant of that. This is kind of dry brushing right now with this rigger, which is pretty fun. I think painting is good for your mind. So sometimes rack your brain when you paint, you know, ask questions, try to solve stuff, but other times like this one, sometimes it's good to let go. You know, it's just a healthy thing to do. Like I said, today I needed a nap. I took a nap. I had the opportunity to take one. Let's just have some fun. Let's get some sap green on this and see what happens. I didn't clean the brush, so it does have the extra dark from when I had put the last one I used it was the trunks, so it still has that umber and indie blue. Ooh, I think it'd be really cool to have some really dark offshoots in the front foreground. So it's just a little bit of sap green with that mixture. I think we can benefit from a little bit of the brush in this fashion. I want to refer to this as scary brush, and I had seen that in a book once where the guy just had his brush all over the place. It was just an old brush that he had, and that's what he used for that texture. So techniques that you see in art books or you see in videos, they're not exclusive to the type of brush that you have. The Hake is just a convenience for me. You know, learn the brush that you want to work with. Like, here's a Chinese brush, goat hair type deal. You can see how it's, I think it's goat hair. It's more fluffy. That would be, now that's for broad washes. And it holds a lot of water. I'm trying to find other brushes for y'all to see. And of course, I can't find them right now. But there's horsehair Chinese brushes that were used for, I call them the bamboo brushes, I believe. Where it's not bamboo, but it was for kind of a bamboo type painting. Where when wet, it's a little bit pointier. And you can get good dry brush effects. And they sell them, you could find some pretty large ones. And that, I think, would be an interesting thing. You could also use, like the one I was describing, but this is a synthetic round. You can use that on the side for shapes. This is, I'm not doing anything with it. There's no water or anything on it. But, you know, don't lock yourself down for one thing with a brush. The Hake, I think, traditionally was used for, what was it used for? Yeah, for initial broad wetting in of paper. I'm going to mix Payne's Gray with burnt umber. I'm just trying to get like a dark from the tube soupy mix. Not even soupy, let's just call it toothpastey mix. Let's get that out. We'll utilize this for the final touches. Now, here is where the risk for overworking a painting would be, I think. And we also have to anticipate the drying shift. And it's not going to have that, what is it, like a satin gloss look to it. It'll dry kind of, I think it'll dry matte. I'm not sure. We'll see. I could, at this point, if I wanted to mix, and you really don't need any stuff like this, but you can mix gum arabic into it with the water, and that livens the color up. But the other thing I'm keeping in mind right now is just staying on the outer edge of my structures. And by outer edge, I mean that far side from the light source. I think that ultramarine blue is going to haunt me. I don't know, what do you all think about that? If this is, if y'all watching this, leave a comment below. I mixed it for this guy. And I could plan them out, but I'm going to try not to. I'm going to talk while I do it so that I keep my mind away from it. There was a video on YouTube. I think it was the American Watercolor Society, and it was a demonstration. It was I think it was from a gentleman doing a painting of kind of a dock scene in the fog from a photo that he had taken. And there was a boat mast, and when he was talking to the crowd and saying how to do it, he was like, all right, you know, you just go, and he doesn't touch the paper, and then he's like, you just do it. And I think he was loosening himself up and pulling himself out of it, so that's here. Now that I can sit back and look, it's a little too pieceworked, so I can come across and put it on the end of the hake. And put it in here. That was more gutsy than that, I think. But when it dries, we'll see the benefits. Let me stand up and take a look. I can, another thing you could always do, just remember this, is that you can move a brush through wet paint and pull that along as well. You could also take this dark and bring a grouping of foliage up here if I want, and bring it in other spots. We have, it's quite sparse in the trees, and that's the way I want it, so I don't want to overdo that. Let's dry this. Look at the big picture, but I believe we'll call it done. So during that drying, you may have seen that drying shift I talked about with the dark, which is always an interesting thing to see. And it's important to watch for, to know about it. This is a little bit damp. Like I said, it kind of went from that sheen to a more matte look with those darks as well. I could have kept a gloss by mixing gum arabic. I think I'll do that next time. I just really try to make things as least complicated as possible. Where I talked about the whites that you could have on here. I think what wax and masking fluid are personally the most complicated. And as you can see, I paint a certain way within a certain time frame. So I just don't have the, I just can't fit that method into my practice. But anyway, that is today's painting and tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, follow, question. I have a whole bunch of links down below. I do have a link with Patreon or PayPal if you want to send anything my way to help with art supplies and whatnot. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.